Okay, hello. Usually we're talking about Robert Frost poems here on this video, but today I'm going to treat three different poets, none of whom are Robert Frost. So the first two are 19th century poets, Emily Dickinson and Gerard Manley Hopkins, and the third is a 20th century poet, e.e.cummings. So you will need to access copies of the three poems because I don't know how to show a poem on the screen while I'm talking to you. It's possible, but I don't know how to do it. So the three poems that you will need to get are by Cummings, In Just, and the one by Emily Dickinson is entitled, well, it's actually in number 348, and the first line is sometimes used as the title, I dreaded that first robin so. And the third poem is by Gerard Manley Hopkins, and the title is Spring. So those are the three poems, and you will need to have the poem in front of you because I'll be referring to certain lines, and it won't make any sense unless you see what I'm talking about. Okay? So let me just begin generally with an introduction about the topic spring, which is very popular for poetry. Think about Chaucer's Canterbury Tales begins with, Avril or whatever in the Old English there. And many poets address springtime because it's a favorite season for many people. And the reasons may vary depending on the person. Children, for example, love springtime because it's freedom and getting out of the house after a long, cold, dreary winter. And they have their light sweaters on and they're running free in the streets. At least that's the way it was for me. And then there are more mature outlooks. Springtime, people say it's a time of rebirth or regeneration of nature, new beginnings, and that kind of thing. And then you may even have some people who don't like spring. They have an aversion to spring, believe it or not. I was rather surprised when I first came across Emily Dickinson's poem, in which she talks about dreading the coming of springtime. So there were surprises in all of this. But in her poem, she uses the voice of one experiencing mental anguish, and whether it was hers by autobiographically or not, that's another question. But anyway, the first poem we're going to look at, and the last one, and by the way, by Hopkins, who was a Roman Catholic priest. He was a Jesuit, and he approaches the topic from a spiritual or religious point of view, because almost all of his works is a commentary on the manifestation of God as seen in the beauty of the universe. His most famous poem probably is the world is charged with the grandeur of God. So in his poem on springtime, that's exactly what we get. Okay, so the first poem, I'll read along with you. It's entitled In Just by e.e.cummings. And if you have your poem, it goes, In just spring, when the world is mud luscious and puddle wonderful, the little lame balloon man whistles far and wee, and Eddie and Bill come running from marbles and piracies, and it's spring when the world is puddle wonderful. The queer old balloon man whistles far and wee, and Eddie and Betty and Isabel come dancing from hopscotch and jump rope, and it's spring, and the goat-footed balloon man whistles far and wee, meaning far and wide. Um, so that's the poem, and to you know to discuss it, you really have to see the visual, looking at the poem in its syntax and in the way it is laid out on the paper. And you will notice that it's not quite like most poems that you read that are, you know, tight little stanzas, maybe 3 or 4 lines each. This is all over the page, and that's the spirit that he wants to create. One of something that's widespread, like the words on his page, widespread in that spring is all encompassing for everyone when they experience it in April, late April, May, and so on. So the mood of the poem is celebratory. He is celebrating how happy and carefree everything is in the world. And we're witnessing the world in this poem through would seem to be through the eyes of a child, because all of the visual details pertain to the kinds of things that little boys and girls might participate in their activities. Marbles and piracies and jump rope and hopscotch and all of that kind of thing. And the words whistle, far, and wee are spread out much the way that when the balloon man comes upon the scene, the sound of the whistle, first it's coming from afar, and then we hear it louder, and then suddenly it's there amongst us, far and wide. That's what we mean in this case, of course. And it's spread out. So that's called enjambment, where the lines kind of roll over into the next line. Half the thought is on one line, but it's carried into the next line, so you don't have a complete sentence in one line of verse. So there's further enjambment as well when he takes the names of the children, Betty and Isabel, and what's the other boy's name? Eddie and whatever his name is. They're kind of like jammed together. So this technique gives us a feeling of sudden quickness of movement in the same way that the children might exhibit this kind of behavior. There's an abundance of running around outdoors and delightful dancing to the music of their imaginations. And over it all, we hear the sound of the whistling balloon man. And we're also told that the little balloon man is goat-footed. And that brings up the allusion to the mythical character Pan, who is playing the flute and leading the children behind him as he plays the flute. So all this, as the children view the outside world as being mud luscious and puddle wonderful. The last line suggests the movement of the blue man moving away from the scene. We hear far and wide, like it disappears. It kind of like dissipates at the end, as the sound does too. So the entire scene is joyful, it's active, it's innocent. The celebration is especially stressed by the word spring, which, if you look closely, you will notice that it appears in equal thirds of the poem. In the first stanza, in the middle, and then at the end. Spring. So that's a child's view of spring, you might call it. The second poem by Emily Dickinson is somewhat of a surprise, at least it was to me, because, she might be considered a nature poet. She was fond of nature, and she was a gardener herself, and in all of her letters that she wrote, she often brought in the details of what she was doing in her garden and the flowers, and she would send pressed flowers to her friends in the letters, along with poems that she wrote. She wrote over 1,000 letters. So, most people think of her as a recluse, which she was, but I don't think we should dwell on that because she lived an extremely active life. She probably was more interactive with people than a good many people living today. She had friends everywhere from childhood, and she kept up those relationships, those correspondences. And so she was a very social person, but behind her closed door. In fact, when people came to visit, she would talk to them through the closed door, which is an oddity, but that's what she wanted, and that was her world. But at any rate, in this particular poem, I was surprised because this is the way it goes. She uses her, for her details, all of those essential elements that we associate with springtime anyway. I dreaded that first robin so, but he is mastered now. I'm some accustomed to him grown. He hurts a little, though. I thought if I could only live till that first shout got by. Not all pianos in the woods had power to mangle me. I did not meet the daffodils, for fear their yellow gown would pierce me with a fashion so foreign to my own. I wished the grass would hurry, so when 'twas time to see, he'd be too tall, tallest one, could stretch to look at me. I could not bear the bees should come. I wish they'd stay away in those dim countries where they go. What world had they for me? They're here, though. Not a creature failed. No blossom stayed away in gentle deference to me, the queen of cavalry. Each one salutes me as he goes, and I, my childish plumes, lift in bereaved acknowledgment of their unthinking drums. Weird, huh? Strange. So ordinarily we think of this New Englandy poet Emily Dickinson, New Englandy, in that she is always talking about the things in her backyard and the mountaintops and everything around her. So she would appear to be a poem of nature, singing its praises much the same way that the romantic poets do. But here, it's different. And she has always addressed nature with an extreme sensitivity. I'll give you an example. In 1851, her brother Austin was a student away at school. He became a teacher, and then he went to law school after that, and became a very prominent citizen in the town of Amherst, where they lived. But while he was away at school, she wrote him this letter. Now, she was born in 1830, and she wrote it in 1851, so she'd be 21 at the time. And this is the way she wrote it to him. In the fall of 1851, she writes, and she was looking forward to his return to come back, on visits while he was away at school. I have tried to delay the frost. I have coaxed the fading flowers. I thought I could have detained a few of the crimson leaves until you have smiled upon them. But their companions called them, and they cannot stay away. You will find the blue hills, Austin, with the autumnal shadows silently sleeping on them, and there will be a glory lingering round the day, so you will know autumn has been here, and the setting sun will tell you if you don't get home till evening. So obviously, this is a person quite sensitive to what she sees around her in terms of nature. Yet, her poem begins with the words, "I dreaded that first robin." You know, this almost appears to be an anti-nature poem. The the harbinger of spring, the robin. And she's telling us she's dreading seeing the first one appearing, you know. And I think what she has done here is taken on the voice of one who is plagued or besieged by anguish, mental anguish, anxiety, depression, and perhaps it was herself, because she was subjected to a number of kinds of losses in her lifetime. Even as a young person, she lost through death many of her very closest friends, and then others moved away, became missionaries, and again others married and moved out of state. And so she spoke about that often in all of her writings. But she also later in life, midlife, became obsessed with death and mortality, and she wrote about the subject of immortality. So here she begins the poem telling us she dreaded the first robin, and like I say, it sounds like she's an anti-nature poet in that regard. But the poem overall stands strong because of the detailed imagery she uses in it and the structure, the rhyme scheme, and the tightness of the entire poem. The first two stanzas tell us that she was dreading the coming of spring through the use of the robin, of course. And she says it was kind of a futile attempt to avoid him, for the robin's music had already arrived, and he had done his work on her. She uses a strange analogy, saying that the sound of the robin pierced her through the heart and hurt her worse than all the passionate piano music that the woods could ever offer or used to hurt her. And even that is a strange analogy when you think about it, like the piano music of the woods. And of course, here she is referring to the insects and all the other sounds of nature emanating from the choirs of birds. And so she said, though, she uses strong language. She says, "I was mangled by it." Then we are told that she has mastered it, and that it is, it has made her feel badly hurt. So the entire concept is somewhat bizarre. She has been assaulted by a cute little robin, happily chirping away, because he has returned to his home ground, in this case, Amherst, Massachusetts, doing his thing, happy to be chipping away. And she says she has mastered his assault on her and grown used to his presence. Yet she throws in that last line, "It still hurts, though." It's kind of weird. So the next assault seems to come from a different area, and now it's the garden of yellow daffodils, which she dared not meet for fear of encountering this dazzling display of color in the sunlight. The assault, she says, would pierce her, and the quatrain ends with these revealing words, and I think this is kind of like the heart of the poem. "It would pierce me with a fashion so foreign to my own." Pierce me with a fashion so foreign to my own. What does she mean? The fashion is like the robins, and in this case the daffodils, are dressed in the color, gay color, you know, and she herself is out of fashion. She sees herself in relation to springtime as an interloper, an outsider, a foreigner, an alien. You know, she doesn't belong here. All of this is going on around her, and she says it's foreign to me. And I think that what she's referring to is that she's experiencing her loss and grieving over those losses. And it's difficult to look around her and see this, if you want to call it happiness or gaiety, around her. And there's no sign of their being, showing their deference to her state, you know, how she feels. They don't even recognize her loss. So she even throws in the word, no creature failed to stay away, like all the poor little animals and the blossoms of the flowers and all that. Nothing stayed back this year. She tells us that I lift in bereaved acknowledgement my childish plumes to that little parade going by me. The little parade, all of the, you know, what we see in nature. No one has stayed away, she says. In each one, the robin, the daffodils, the grass, the bees, they all salute her as they go by. So this is the scene, and this is her. And I think it might be an injustice to say that this is her state of depression at all times. It was a permanent condition. It wasn't. It is, in this case, the tone of the speaker. Other poems could be used to contradict the idea that she was permanently depressed. All right, and I think of one, and one comes to mind when she says that she feels out of fashion with the season. There's a poem entitled "The Morns Are Meeker Than They Were," and in this particular poem, she is talking about the season of autumn when the days are getting shorter, and when you wake up in the morning, it is not as bright as it might have been in May or June when the sun rose early. So now the morns are getting meeker as the day, like the sunrise, it might not be until 7:20 instead of 5:20 and 2 hours later. So morns are getting meeker. So this is the way the poem goes, and I'll show you why I think this is kind of like related to what she has just said about not being in fashion with the season of spring. She says, the morns are meeker than they were. The nuts are getting brown. The berry's cheek is plumper. The rose is out of town. The maple wears a gayer scarf. The field a scarlet gown. And this is the line. Lest I should be old-fashioned, I'll put a trinket on. So in other words, she's going to join in the gaiety of the season by adorning herself with a trinket. And you see, it's just far cry from her joining into the celebration of season of spring with all of those little creatures she mentioned, the bees and the flowers and everything else. So it's a cute little poem, yet it doesn't sound like something I would have expected from Emily Dickinson. All right, so now the third poem is the most difficult. I mean, if you have the copy by Gerard Manley Hopkins entitled Spring, this is this I think is an example of how difficult his poetry is. It's not easy reading. It's not what they say accessible to the average person. But it's not that bad. It begins with a declarative statement saying, "Nothing is so beautiful as spring." But remember what I said about Hopkins. He's a Catholic priest. He was a dedicated priest, and he was a lover of nature, and he was also an artist. So he took in everything, all of the splendor that he saw. He took it in, and he worked with it both in his art and also in his poetry. So I'll read the poem through, and then I'll read my analysis of the poem because it's not that easy. So here we go. Nothing is so beautiful as spring, when weeds and wheels shoot long and lovely and lush, thrusts, eggs look low, little low heavens, and thrush through the echoing timber does so rinse and ring the ear. It strikes like lightnings to hear him sing. The glassy pear trees, leaves and blooms, they brush the descending blue. That blue is all in a rush with richness. The racing lambs, too, have fair their fling. So that's the octave. This is a sonnet, which means it's a 14-line poem. The first 8 lines are called the octave, and it usually sets up some kind of proposition. And then the sestet, the remaining 6 lines of the 14, is an answer to those proposed in the first part, either question answer or a change of view or an opposite kind of view of something that he's talking about. And that line 9, the first line of the sestet, is called the volta or the turn, Turn, which means the whole meaning of the poem changes. Okay, so in the first 8 lines, the octave, I read those, and I'll go over those again because they're not easy. He is talking about the things you see about you in springtime. Like, it's just beautiful. But I'll get into the details in a minute. So the sestet raises the question and gives an answer. It says, what is all this juice and all this joy? Springtime. A strain on the earth's sweet being in the beginning, in Eden garden. Have, get, before it cloy, before it cloud, Christ, Lord, and sour with sinning, innocent mind and Mayday, and girl and boy. Most, O maid's child, thy choice and worthy the winning. What the heck did he just say? That's what you're saying. And that's what I thought too. But I'll walk you through it, and we'll get some sense out of it. You can read it again on your own, or pause this and then come back to me. But read it a couple of times and see if you can get 1 or 2 little bits of meaning out of it. But anyway, let me read what I have for an analysis of the poem. Gerard Manley Hopkins was a Roman Catholic priest. In his presentation on the topic of spring, the focus is more of the manner in which nature reflects the beauty of God in all of creation. How nature shows the manifestation of God in everything that we see in nature is reflecting the glory of God. That's his mantra. That's in everything he writes. That's basically what you will find in the poem. So Hopkins' poetic treatment of spring demonstrates a strong dynamic energy mirroring that same energy found in the energy of nature's regeneration of things, like trees coming back, budding, the flowers they're blooming, the animals coming back and joining in the chorus of song. All of these things is an energy flowing through it all, okay? And that energy is the um, the energy of God, sustaining and regenerating everything in the world. Now, I'll take you through that a little bit line by line, but that's basically what I'm talking about here. His diction, that means his word choice, not the way he speaks, but the choice of words used to convey a sense of suddenness, power, dynamic spirit at work throughout the entire sonnet. Moreover, his choice of form, the sonnet, allows for an argument where he sets up a postulation in the beginning and then an answer, a discernment of that in the second half of the poem. So one of the best known works that he wrote is entitled The World is Charged with the Grandeur of God. And many people have written about Gerard Manley Hopkins, who was not even known during his lifetime as a poet. In fact, none of his works were ever published during his lifetime. But there were many biographers today who herald him as a classic. He has reached that state. In fact, he's buried with the major poets in Westminster Abbey in Poets Corner. So, he established a canon, canon, of poetry that is recognized as classical. Okay, and he was a classical scholar himself from Oxford. But anyway, Paul Mariani is one of the biographers, and he delineates Hopkins' mission in writing poetry. He says that his mission in conveying through poetry this vision of God's presence in all of creation, that it's there, but people have to recognize it or discern it. And this is the way Mariani expresses that idea. All that was wanting, he believed, Hopkins now, was the beholder. In other words, all this beauty is in the world, and the only thing lacking is for someone to see it and appreciate it. And when the beheld and the beholder once meet, when the essential nature of the thing was in stress, and what he means by in stress, that's a very key word with Hopkins, it means it was made evident upon the eye, the ear, and the tongue, and the mind. The heart could not help but rise up at a sudden unheard sympathy, a dance, the heart growing bold and bolder as it hurled itself after its creator, the one who bode there and abided. So in other words, he's saying that Hopkins' mission was to share with those who don't see it the beauty that is manifested everywhere in the world. Everything had a uniqueness. People have a uniqueness. Everything in the world has a uniqueness. And if we look closely, we will see that uniqueness. And it's a beauty because it reveals its inner soul, whether it's a person or a thing or even a sound like a bell or the sound of a skylark or the sound of a wave. Anything, okay, has a uniqueness to it. So in this poem, if you look at it line by line, he begins by describing the reemergence of the weeds and the flowers, and he uses the verb shoots. They shoot, which again conveys the suddenness of activity everywhere. Things are shooting all over the place. The pear trees are said to leave and bloom. Now, when he says leave and bloom, these are not nouns, these are verbs. They're creating leaves, they're creating blooms, they leave and bloom. Hence, we have an exploding image of the trees suddenly bursting into life, trees leaving and blooming. The trees are then seen as artists. He says they are brushing the descending blue sky. The link to the next line, that blue is all in a rush, continues this mood of tumultuous activity. Everything is exploding in nature. There is a frantic spirit in the unfolding of spring as reflected in everything participating in this joyous event. Here the sky is hurrying to join in the merriment, giving the impression of life being impatient to come into existence. The last two lines of the octave describe the joyous lambs. We are told they are racing and that they too have fair their fling. Play on words. A fling is defined as a short period of enjoyment or wild behavior or activity. So the underlying meaning here implies that this entire scene of hectic activity is spontaneous, but it will not last. It's short-lived. So the sestet, that would be line 9 on to 14, the last part, shifts from a description of this joyous scene to now a spiritual reflection in that they too, I'm sorry, I just jumped the line, on a spiritual reflection and on its significance, what this all means. Okay, in other words, we're looking at all of this activities, but what does it mean? Okay, if we reflect on it, what does it signify to me? The first line, known as the turn, as I said, asks what all this beauty and all this joy represents for us to contemplate. This change of perspective provides for a commentary on the octave's meaning. We are told that the season of spring is no more, and this is quoting his line, it's no more than a strain on earth's sweet beginning. A strain on earth's sweet beginning. So two ideas here. One, strain, and two, earth's sweet beginning. So a strain, we sometimes refer to a strain as like a strain of a flu, a variant, a subtype of it. All right. So this springtime is like a subgroup or an outflowing, a remnant of Earth's beginning. That would be Eden, the Garden of Eden. In the beginning, everything was wonderful. In other words, there's no sin, and there's complete joy. So springtime is like a residual effect of that Garden of Eden. Okay, something we can enjoy. However, because of the fall of man, it's short-lived. Springtime doesn't last. Nothing gold can stay, as Frost said. You know, nature's first green is gold. So Eden sank to grief, he says in that same poem. So, you know, Adam and Eve, they ate the apple that are, you know, they lost everything. So the sestet shifts from this description of a joyous scene to a spiritual reflection on its significance. And this change of perspective provides for a commentary. We are told that the season is no more than a strain on Earth's sweet beginning. In other words, it's something that we have a hint at of what it must have been like in the Garden of Eden. Okay? The third line is an exhortation to have, get, before it cloy, before it cloud, Christ Lord, and sorrow with sinning. Well, it's kind of a confusing sentence for sure. But there's a sense of urgency before it all disappears, congruent to the brevity of spring, that short-lived. So also, we must grasp before it loses its purity what the the beauty or the richness of the Lord, the tasting now the richness of the Lord. Psalm 34:8 says, "O taste and see that the Lord is good. Bless the man who takes refuge in him." Both of these verbs are sensory actions, thereby suggesting a desire to experience the goodness of the Lord, taste and see, two senses. So Hopkins is offering an eager invitation to experience the richness of God's goodness as we might find it in the beauty of the universe, which is most visible or recognizable perhaps in springtime, although it is also in the other seasons as well. Before it cloud and sour with sinning, metaphorically alludes to the second line, earth's sweet beginning. In the beginning, everything was lost through sin. So here, the diction suggests a tainting at sinning, thereby obscuring our relationship with God. Our eventual loss of innocence drives the urgent need to seize the chance to experience pure joy through our relationship with God. The closing lines are really a prayer, imploring the innocent, and this is the line, innocent mind and May Day and girl or boy, to seek Christ, for we are worthy of his redemption. Whether we sin or lose our innocence, the choice of choosing Christ is ours and worth the winning. Most old maid's child. Okay, so that's not as simple as in just when everything is mud luscious and puddle wonderful. However, it does kind of reflect on the beginning of time when everything was mud and darkness. So that's my take on those three poems by three quite uniquely different poets.